It was November 25th, 2015.
Miami Police 5, Jones, do you have an emergency?
Yeah, hi.
What is the emergency?
Domestic violence at the Opera Tower.
Okay, can you be more specific?
Yeah,
What
well,
is the
I see a
emergency?
guy. I see the man beating on a woman.
Is he armed with a weapon?
He's not armed with a weapon, but she is
Does she
bleeding.
need
She needs a cops to come down here.
Okay,
so
the
they can
police
take
are
care of-
coming. The police are coming.
I was attending a concert of a Venezuelan artist, Oscar de Leon, my dad's favorite artist. The similarity between my dad and that artist was surprising. My dad even imitated him. An old dancer friend of mine, Lorraine, got me a ticket for that event. She knew my dad, and she knew how emotional it would be for me to see that artist performing live. She knew how special my dad was. She also, like me, had migrated to Miami. There I was, inside my car in the parking lot of the venue, the Fillmore Theater in Miami Beach. I was very excited because seeing this man performing live was going to be like seeing my father in person. Suddenly, I felt an impact on the back of my car. An older lady accidentally hit my vehicle while she was parking. I didn't know the procedure to follow in the United States in case of a collision. It was the first time something like this had happened to me, and I didn't know many people I could call to advise me on that process. So I made the big mistake of calling him for advice on what the procedure was. But hey, by then his role was that of the sympathetic one who had accepted my decision to separate. He guided me through the collision process, and after answering me, he asked me where I was. I told him without any problem everything was chilled at that time. He instantly expressed to me that he knew how much this artist reminded me of my dad, and that he knew it was going to be very emotional for me. He asked me to please allow him to come to the event, that he wanted to support me at that moment. Today I understand all the manipulation techniques he used on me. At that time, I didn't understand that it was my dad's memory that he used the most to keep me in the traumatic circle. At that point, I mentioned to him that it was Lorraine who got me the ticket. He knew her too, as she occasionally worked for his company. So, out of politeness, it was hard to say no to him. I never invited him. He invited himself. Mind you, I was very clear. I told him if he came, not to misunderstand the occasion, he on his own side and me on mine. That was the condition. He accepted, chill. And today, I understand that everything in life is a decision. And at that time, I had no idea that this decision would change my life completely. I spent a lot of time blaming myself for it, thinking if only I hadn't fallen once again into his manipulations. Well, he arrived at the event. He seemed the most respectful until he started consuming a lot of alcohol. At one point during the concert, I got very emotional, and Lorraine hugged me. I hugged her. It is a special moment. And he wanted to be part of that moment, yes or yes. His role at that moment was that of the melancholic, but he was so pushy. He wanted to take selfies with me as if we were something again, just like the same behavior pattern I mentioned at the beginning. The concert was over. I decided to leave because I had a job as a host at a well-known place in Miami called Blue Martini in Brickell. Lorraine was also going there with a friend, and he coincidentally was also planning to go to Blue Martini to meet some friends. As I drive in my car, leaving Miami Beach, I get a call from him to tell me,
"Hey, what do you think if we go in one car so we don't pay double parking?"
He proposed to leave my car at my house and go in his car. Quickly, a thought came to my mind of a refusal, a resounding no. My intuition was somehow thinking of an escape plan should any situation arise. So I told him no, that in such a case he would go in my vehicle, and if he wanted, he could leave his car in front of my building. He agreed. Many times we silence our intuition to keep things peaceful and avoid confrontation, and it is for that reason that sometimes we find ourselves falling down a painful and dark precipice. Once on site, his usual irregular behaviors began. He began to demand attention. He had violent behavior with 2 people. These are clear red flags of a controlling and aggressive behavior pattern. The people who hired me that night, Dennis and his wife, noticed his behavior and were alarmed. On several occasions, they asked me if everything was okay. I could only say that I didn't know what was wrong with him. It was a show, and I had to look down in embarrassment. Little by little, the worst was about to come. And tension began to rise when mysteriously WhatsApp conversations of mine appeared on his cell phone. He started to complain to me, and the only thought that I have in my mind was, how could he have my conversations? He hacked my phone. But how? When? And what point if I had nothing to do with this guy? His claims wouldn't stop. I was working and couldn't believe what was happening. My answers were short and precise. You and I have no relationship. Leave me alone. It's not your business what I do with my life. In that moment, he snatched my cell phone and disappeared. I was very angry. A friend of his even said to me in sorrow not to consent to his manipulations anymore. About 40 minutes passed. I had already finished working. He showed up with my cell phone as if nothing had happened. I was embarrassed by his behavior in front of everyone. So I decided to leave. All my people had already left. He calmly asked me to please take him to his car. I put as a condition that I didn't want any complaints because there was no relationship between us. And he said in a very understanding way, "Okay, I never imagined that after that okay, which appeared serene in front of people so that no one would suspect what he was about to do, I would receive a brutal beating that would change the course of my next days, my career, and my life." As I was driving in the late hours of the night through the streets of Braco on my way home, he started yelling at me, humiliating me, and denigrating me. He yelled at me that I was a fucking whore. I kept driving. I kept calm, took deep breaths. I nodded to him. I would say, okay. When he saw that his insults didn't get me out of control, he gave me the first punch straight to my face. My head bounced like a basketball against the car seat, and I lost control of the car. I couldn't believe what he had done. A voice said to me, hang on, keep driving, get to a safe place. I don't know if it was my intuition. He kept insulting me and started yelling such horrible things at me that they scared my soul for a long time. As he continued to beat me, he yelled at me that my dad was rolling over his grave knowing what a whore I was, that he had died knowing that I was such a whore. He also yelled at me that he was very happy about the stroke my mother had just suffered. This is a clear sign of a person who has zero empathy for a human being, one of the main characteristics of a narcissistic psychopath. He always used my father's memory, from beginning to end. Because he knew his loss has been a pain I have had to learn to live with. And he knew it perfectly, because bending me over and torturing me using his name was his constant play. Remember, one of the narcissist's missions is to know your vulnerabilities to then use them against you. Every blow I received, anger, my blood burned, my hands were sweating, my heart rate was 10,000 per hour. He kept humiliating me and hitting me so hard. My head kept bouncing off the seat. He was trying to hit me with an open hand so as not to leave any marks, because he always told me without any shame that this was his tactic when fighting and attacking, so as not to leave any traces of his aggressions. But I never thought he used it with women, unless he would use it on me. The blows were so strong that the physical marks couldn't be avoided, let alone the emotional ones. They were a violation to my soul. Totally. I just decided to hold on, and to tell the truth, it was the longest 8 fucking minutes of driving in my life. But it wasn't an option to stop on the road. I needed to get to a safe place, hoping to save my life that was compromised. Because I could have lost control of the car, and I could have caused an accident and ended someone's life. As I lost control of the car, I came very close to hitting another vehicle. Thank God there was no tragedy. Thank God those in that vehicle saw the whole thing. They witnessed how I lost control and the beating he was giving me. So they decided to follow me because they feared for my life. But I didn't know they were following me, much less that they were witnessing the crime. When we arrived at our destination, my residence at Opera Tower, he wouldn't get out of my car. I was yelling at him to get out, and he kept telling me that I was a piece of shit and he wouldn't get out. I couldn't longer feel my face. I was desperate. With one of the last blows he gave me, something ran down my nose. And when I decided to look at myself in the review mirror, I woke up. I was shocked to see myself beaten and bloodied. It was painful. That made me wake up from the shock I was in. I demanded that he get out of my car, yes or yes. He insisted that he wouldn't. He had such a Machiavellian, perverse, evil look in his eyes. It even makes me shiver remembering. It was there that I got the idea to roll down the windows and desperately shout over for help because I had no other choice. You can't measure a man's strength against woman's strength. That scared him, and I managed to get him out of the car. I thought it was all over, but no. My hands were shaking uncontrollably by then as I drove around the building to enter the parking lot of my residence. The nightmare returned, and without a word, he jumped like a diver through my car window. I panicked again, and he kept assaulting me. He kept saying things that my nervous system can no longer remember. I kept pushing him to get out of my car, but he refused to get out. I was screaming for help, and at that moment my nerves were very upset because of my screams. Fortunately, the valet parking attendant showed up. He heard my screams asking for help and came over. He was an elderly immigrant gentleman. He looked confused, and it was right here that the evidence of his criminal mind and narcissistic victimhood was recorded through the security cameras. Immediately seeing that someone approached a witness and that he had been discovered, he began to play the victim, the abused, the beaten one. I would push him by the left shoulder and he would grab his head on the right side. His acting was even incoherent, coldly calculated to make people believe that he was the one being abused. And here is what is dangerous with this pattern of behavior. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of the dangerous techniques that narcissistic psychopaths use to get away with their crimes, playing the victim. You can see this clearly on the cameras. Thousands of people saw this, the press saw this, and yet chose to support him and believe the many lies that were fabricated, which I will go into in more detail later. It isn't until now that I'm exposing everything that was behind my case, and this is just the beginning. It was thanks to that man that I was saved. If it hadn't been for him, I don't know what else would have happened. I don't know what else he would have done to me. Then two angels appeared, the ones who were driving the vehicle I almost hit. Their names, Jimmy and Leonardo. They followed me to the final crime scene, and one of them so clearly when his blows made me bleed. They feared he would take my life. They wanted to somehow save me or help me. Honestly, these gentlemen were heroes. When I managed to enter the parking lot, one of them was seen on the security cameras. He was shouting loudly to the security guard. He beat her. he beat her. And that is how they became the most powerful witnesses in what would be the beginning of a very serious, outrageous, and dirty legal battle. If you have gone through unfair, toxic, and abusive circumstances, I would like to help you recognize, validate, and release those experiences and emotions. Let's take steps full of self-love, courage, and vulnerability because you deserve it. Go to the link in the description, maggalife.com/liberation, and get your masterclass and workbook. It's free. With love, Magdiel.